We'll follow your cues.
Well, good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. I think we have most of our panel here. I think we heard yesterday how important it was to utilize the International Space Station, particularly in it has a finite lifetime, and it really is the road to exploration. And in order to do that, I think, as we heard yesterday, it's going to be important that we look at sharing the facilities and working together to achieve the objectives that we have to achieve. Last year, we addressed the same question, and we had a very good discussion group that Dan Burbank and Anessa chaired. And Dan Burbank can't be here today. He's going to be moving to Star City and will be the NASA representative in Star City, and he said he would be very happy to work with you over there, Anessa, so you can look forward to seeing Dan in Russia. But they came up with some very good recommendations, and certainly one of the topics for this group to address are their recommendations. And I think we have a very good moderator today for the discussion, Bill Gerstemeyer, who is the Associate Administrator for Exploration and Operations. Bill, I think, has been involved in the space station program for a number of years. He served as the space station program manager. He was involved in the shuttle program integration, led that activity, and then also shuttle mirror operations, and spent a year in Moscow working on the shuttle mirror program. So he's quite familiar with the need to do experimentation on the space station and its importance. So let me turn it over to Bill.
Thanks, George. We have a really distinguished panel here of folks ready to talk to us about cooperative research activities, facilities, and personnel in space. And rather than doing the introductions, I think they've been introduced throughout the day, yesterday, and I think you know them. If there's something that they would like to say about their own background or introduction as they make kind of their opening remarks, they can go ahead and add a little bit about their background and how it may pertain to this particular action or this particular discussion topic of cooperative research. So I think, again, as George said, last year we had a pretty extensive discussion on cooperative research. It even came up yesterday. Charlie got up and talked a little bit about how the fact it seems that we spend a lot of time talking about cooperative research, but then it's tough to find evidence of where we've actually made progress from one year to the next. And I know of several examples of where we've made progress, but what I'd like to do is kind of challenge this panel, and this is totally real time, so we'll see how well they respond in real time to questions. But I'd like each one of them to address a little bit what they've seen as an example of positive cooperative research that's occurred on space stations. So I'll stall a little bit so they can think, and I'll add a few more words. But the idea is to think of things that have either happened in the last year or things that we're doing now that are examples of where we've made advances, and we're able to do more cooperative research between investigators and maybe even across disciplines and other things along those lines. And then the next question that I'll ask, other than what the successes are, is the second question will be what kind of enabled that cooperation. I mean, there had to be some enabling or forcing function that made us want to cooperate, and maybe we can learn from those forcing functions, those things that allowed us to cooperate or helped facilitate the cooperation, so we can do things in the future and set the environment up such we can even get more cooperation. So with that, I'll be quiet and I'll turn over to them and see if they have positive examples of cooperative research activities or facilities or personnel that they can give. So this is not the time to tell me that things are not good and we're not cooperating and we're not doing work. That will come later. You can go. That's the easy question. The question now is to turn it around and where is there an example of positive cooperative research that's occurred. So I think I'll just run down the panel from kind of I guess my left to right, and we'll start with Mike.
Okay. no pressure. I think we mentioned that the ISS is now finished, and we're shifting to a paradigm from assembly to use of it as a big complex laboratory. And along with that, we're realizing how segmented some of the resources are. For instance, on the Russian side, there's lower body negative pressure capability and the gamma system, which gives you tremendous downlink real-time telemetry. On the US side, we have ultrasound imagery and metabolic gas analysis. And we found out that there's a lot of barriers, which I would say are artificial, that keep us from putting those resources together. So we've been working in the last couple of years to try to jump over those barriers, and some of those we could always use managerial help with, pointing to my left there. But we do have an experiment investigation, which is the fluid shift investigation, which will involve U.S. segment crew members coming to the Russian segment and bringing their ultrasound and metabolic gas analysis with them, and putting crew members in lower body negative pressure suit, the Chibis, and using the gamma system, and obviously medical people from both sides. We haven't had U.S. people in lower body negative pressure since Neurolab in 97-ish? 98. I'm almost off by one here, I notice. But it's been difficult to do that. So it's a positive example, and I expect really good results. I expect a lot of understanding of our vision intracranial pressure, risk, and other things that are the very fundamental understanding of vascular physiology. But to deal with hardware certification issues to cross those borders up there, to deal with joint crew involvement, crew time, has been very complicated. And if there's a way that we can streamline some of those processes, I think it would help us tremendously. So positive, we'd like to make it simpler, and we'd like to, in the remaining years of station, do much more of this type of collaborative research.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Larry?
Good morning, and I would like to dovetail to what Mike was saying. And there are two aspects to the story that I'd like to mention here. First off, I would like to talk about the med support system, medical operations support system that is very well integrated the way we have it. And the medical teams, as they implement procedures, standards, and such, not only pre-flight but also during and post-flight, is a very positive result, the way I see it, the way we see it. And I'm thinking that moving from the assembly to the science phase on station is a very critical phase, and it was decided way before that every site will provide their resources, will support their cosmonauts and astronauts, and so we initially kind of divided and broke into separate apartments as part of one building, and it had negative impacts psychologically as well as what concerns cooperation in science programs. But currently, thanks to the program management, the opinion was changed, and there was a sea change at that. And now it's targeting us towards cooperation, both as far as the resources are concerned, as well as the intellectual capabilities that the station provides, the accomplishments that are there in achieving the common goals that had been set before us, and that will allow us to enable the future of space exploration, developing it at that. And therefore, both with the help of Michael, as well as John Charles, who is leading the effort of the team, the multilateral team that examines the risks as it pertains to the exploration. And now we're very actively involved in the efforts that are underway as part of this program. Not everything is a success story. Obviously, there are some standalone national programs that take priority, but then we do find some common ground, and we grab it when we do. Namely, the visual function research, the functional test with the negative lower body test, and we are attempting to kind of sense what the mechanisms are, what those drivers are. And it's very important, if not critical, to not only make it possible to undertake joint research, but also to instill those mechanisms that allow us to share the data, collect the data, to examine and get insight into the data that we have. And I do believe that the scientists, the scientific body as a whole, will need to overcome some inertia exhibited by some of our managers that are not quite on the same page with us as far as the new rules are concerned, new rules of the game. And I'm really hoping for cooperation in biomedical and med support research areas, because these areas do have a lot in common, particularly when it comes to examining and preventing the risks that come up during long duration flights. Thank you so much for your time. Валерий Васильевич.
That was a collaborative experiment, which I was actually a subject in. Right, and it had U.S. and Russian co-investigators, and actually some, I would say, fairly significant results to it in the realm of cardiovascular physiology. Russian hardware, U.S. hardware, and worked beautifully.
That's a very good example. David?
So we've been privileged over the last 5 years with NASA's support to take some software measurement that we developed through the NSPRI to ISS, and especially privileged that 24 astronauts agreed to participate in it. We've had more than 2,000 downloads. The system, from my standpoint, worked incredibly well. Everybody responsible for helping us get the software on the support computers. The astronauts themselves taking time out of their busy days to do this incredibly annoying thing that I asked them to do, which is so valuable to get the information, and we've just recently looked at it relative to one-year missions. So the cooperation there was very much, I suppose, inside the NASA family, but those astronauts were from the United States and JAXA and Canada and Europe. And so we haven't yet had a chance to do this in spaceflight with our Russian colleagues, but they were good enough to let us into Mars 520, where we had the same software, and there we do have an extensive data on their astronaut surrogates studied in Mars 520. And again, we got a very high rate of data return and learned a great deal. The sensitivity around all data, but especially behavioral data, data related to fatigue and stress and moods and performance data, cognitive data, is very high, and it needs to be maintained. The confidentiality needs to be maintained. We work extremely hard. Excuse me. We work extremely hard to ensure that, and to make it anonymous when we aggregate it and report it. But I also think a key part of going forward on ISS and going forward in our analogs is data sharing. And Matthias Basner and I have worked very hard with the help of the Russians to develop data sharing processes where we have given data to Matthias, is it 6 different investigators approximately around the world who were also gathering data in Mars 520. So we're a very big believer in data sharing and ensuring that our data is used maximally in any way it can be by other investigators as well as ourselves. We think the preciousness, the cost of getting this data is so high, and the time of the astronauts is so precious that we should maximize leverage in every possible way, sharing this data out to help other investigators. So I would say right now the ISS processes for people who would say, well, you can't get data on 24 astronauts and get 2,500 downloads throughout the mission, they're just wrong. You can. Now, it helps to have software and not hardware, so there's no stow, unstow training, all sorts of things. But it's sufficiently annoying that they did it, so that actually says a great deal about them, their professionalism, and also about our ability to do it. So I'm extremely optimistic, Bill, about the future of ISS as a research platform for sharing data, for coming up with measures that, and in fact, if I'd known it earlier, we would have asked for input potentially from international colleagues in that. What else would you like to see in our software that we could feasibly do without adding much time to it? There's no reason we couldn't start at that level and start trying to find ways to further integrate information in. In the end, we all kind of want to know pretty much the same information about the health and behavior of the astronauts and their ability to optimize themselves under unpredictable conditions. That's it.
Okay. Thank you very much. There's lots of good little nuggets here that I'm writing down, and we'll summarize here at the end. But these are really good positive examples. And again, I think the big focus on station has been the shift from assembly to research. So that same energy that the teams put into building Space Station is now going into research. So I think the entire program and all the effort is really focused on trying to support the research community to make sure we get the most quality data that we can out of this unique facility. So, and I think I heard that echoed really in the first three discussions. And I'll turn it next over to Bernard, and he'll correct that he's not from ESA, he's from DLR.
Yes.
And you can go ahead and give us some positive examples.
Yeah, thank you very much for this kind introduction, and I can perfectly well follow along the lines of my previous speakers that it has been a great success working together with our international partners, the ISS, with Russia, the US, ESA for sure, as we are a member of ESA in Germany. But let me put the focus to some questions with regard to analogs. There are basic questions which have to be answered right now to guarantee, or at least to contribute to guaranteeing future progress with the ISS in the near future. And that is why we picked up on the idea of having a research facility actually here in Cologne, established NBHAP it is called, that gives, from our point of view, some very good opportunities to foster this future cooperation. And let me put it this way. If I focus on the ground instead of the ISS, it simply means that we have programs running, PhD programs running, which concentrate on life sciences to really strengthen the international cooperations which we do have. And in the long run, we hope that we can, with our small institute, contribute to progress of ISS and have sound with NVAP, a sound facility that helps further and foster this progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Anessa, any remarks?
So I would, I'm sorry, я хотела бы продолжить
I would like
то, что
to continue, expand on what Valery has said.
Действительно, мы начали полеты
When we started
на нашей станции.
using our
Я бы
space
сказала, с очень
station,
высокого старта.
I would
Мы
say
начали,
we started off
были преемниками,
at a very high point because
который
we
явил собой пример международной
were
станции,
continuing the experience of Mir Space Station, which was a great international
со всеми
station
странами
with a
мира,
lot of
включая
international
азиатские
science
страны. Я не
experiments
говорю уже о наших
that
контактах
included participants from various countries around the world, including countries from Asia, Europe, and the United States.
Сможем это продолжить теперь, используя весь
So
тот
now
опыт и все те связи,
we thought we would have a new space
Вот
station
здесь ожидало нас
which would
глубокое
allow us
разочарование.
to continue
Наверное, именно
with the
нам,
same
кто летал
effort.
на мире,
And that's where
и кто
we
испытал тот
saw some
модус
disappointment.
работы со
Those of us who
своими
worked with Mir
коллегами-партнерами,
Station and had an
разочарование оказалось
opportunity to
особенно
work
глубоким. И мы никак не можем
the way
забыть,
we worked with
что мы
Mir,
умеем, можем и очень хорошо
were
умеем.
somewhat disappointed with the way our work continued on the space
Но я бы
station
сказала, что не
because
только те, кто работали
we know
тогда
that
вместе,
we can work well together.
научились сейчас, мы обрели очень большое количество новых друзей и партнеров,
But Now we were able to obtain a lot of new friends, new partners. We are planning a lot of very similar activities and research, and we think it is very difficult to overcome the obstacle of doing the exact same thing on several sides. We have the same science platform, which is the space station. We have the same goals at the level of management and at the level of science research. And yet, we can't really get it together in terms of working on the same projects cooperatively. And just think how much savings we would be able to obtain working together in terms of finance and effort. So what is it that does not allow us to work together, to cooperate more tightly? I was told that it's very difficult to work with the engineering community. And Dr. Gerstenmaier will remember that we attempted to create working groups that would include researchers and engineers. And it turned out that it wasn't difficult at all. And these working groups are functioning very well now. So they said, well, you see, every scientist wants to protect their authority and their intellectual property. But the thing is, when we work together, what we're really think about is that we want to make sure
этой станции, которые делают невозможным контакты, как бы все-таки эти контакты сохранить, если они начались
good contacts, good working relationship that would allow us to pursue our work on board this station. I think it's very important. Maybe I'm being politically incorrect, but I would like to address this issue to our management. I think that our management that can see the purpose of our work.
Это то, что наработается на этой станции. Ну так давайте нарабатывать.
We need to make sure that we have all opportunities to work together on board the station.
Мы работаем с группой, с которой мы начали на мире, а продолжаем с группой, которая продолжает тех, кто начинал с нами на мире. Я имею в виду лаборатории профилактики и лаборатории Так что мы делаем? Мы идем неформальными путями, ищем какие-то возможные постановки экспериментов, которые бы, несмотря на то, что мы
to come up with all these different ways of cooperating with them, unofficial ways, and I think that's incorrect because I'm convinced that we should have ample opportunities to cooperate directly without any issues. I'm ready to work for free. I'm ready to volunteer my time and effort, but we have to make sure we have opportunities to work together towards the common goal. And I think that at this point in time, everything that pertains to organization and logistics is so cumbersome, is so fraught with bureaucracy that we can't continue our work. The thing is, we've been working together for a long time together. We don't have to be so fearful of some of our ideas being taken away from us. Everybody already knows everything that we're working on, so I think we should share and strengthen our research. I remember when I was working with Mir Station, Austin Mir program, French program. I work with our Bulgarian and Indian colleagues.
Но тем не менее, здесь за все время, которые мы работаем, если сказать формально, за 15 лет, моя лаборатория и мой отдел,
исследования,
вот таких, которые были бы утверждены, мы можем сказать, как большое достижение. нам разрешили вместе проводить
was
филд-тест.
allowed
И то,
to do
до сих пор этот филд-тест
field
не
testing
оформлен.
together with other countries, with other partners, even though we weren't able to finalize all the paperwork for it.
Как будто это нужно нам. Это нужно нам всем. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you.
Thank you, Inessa. And is it Jeff down there? Yeah, Jeff?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bill. So when you look at the wonderful cooperative research that takes place on ISS, there are many examples, and I'd just like to mention two. One is picking up on the topic that David Dinges was talking about. I believe, David, the software that you were referring to is the Psychomotor Vigilance task, which you've really spearheaded and done some very beautiful work. And this task, David mentioned, was also used in the Mars 500 set of experiments, and of course the 520-day study that utilized this test resulted in a publication that received a lot of attention last year in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that had an international author team. And what I would like to point out is that there's really a very beautiful, sophisticated suite of cognitive tasks that are in development by David and Matthias and others that are making their way to the space station that will really enhance knowledge in the neurobehavioral and performance areas. And the point that I'd like to make, in addition to there being international collaboration with this new set of tasks called cognition, is that development and ground-based validation that's been supported is in a pipeline that makes its way to the ISS. And this is very important, that really top-tier research that's being developed on the ground and tested then makes its way to space. The thoroughness and rigor of the science that's done prior to this set of tasks in cognition getting to station is really important, because one of the things that one tries to do, as we try to do in Mars 520, is to ensure that not only is there, of course, utilization of precious facilities, but that the science that comes out of it really is top tier and has high impact. In a second example that I'd like to point out relates to the one-year study and the fact that there is an opportunity because of the American astronaut being a twin to inject some of the very exciting work that's being done in the omics field, and we're going to hear more about this at lunch from our guest speaker. But I see this as an area of burgeoning international collaboration and really has the potential to be transformative and really take advantage in human work as well as in non-human work of the station's capabilities for the entire international community. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Yuri?
Окей. Ну, мне бы хотелось отметить то, о чем говорил Сатан, что те конгрессы, которые проводятся еще в рамках АСТО, где Джефф был в этом году, Ричард Дженнингс и многие другие. Надо сказать, что вот сегодняшний наш с вами, так сказать, саммит меня очень
The summit that we're holding here today,
и я поверил в то, что вот это объединение наше, оно возможно.
leaves a big impression on me.
Васильевич сказал Богомолов о том, что
Valery Bogomolov was saying that the degree of cooperation in the area of medical research and operations is pretty high, but it took a lot of effort. I've been working in this area since 1994, and I know that things weren't always going so smoothly, even in this area. in the area of
Но
medical
сейчас это
operations.
удалось преодолеть, и
But
надо
at
сказать,
this
что
point, we were able to
вот эта
overcome all the
интегрированность,
hurdles,
она очень
and
важна в плане
this
того,
degree of
чтобы нам
integration is very
осмыслить
important,
все-таки, что же
and
происходит.
it allows
Если мы
us
говорили
to
в Чикаго,
realize
опять же,
everything that's going on and be aware of things that are going on.
и как мы делали,
At the
проводили
Congress
медицинский отбор
in
испытателей
Chicago, we
Марс
talked
500,
about our selection
какие
process for
получены
Mars
основные
500.
результаты, то
We
в
talked about
Сан-Диего
the
уже
major
говорили
results
о
of that
том,
experiment, and in San Diego,
соавтор,
we were talking about something different.
боли в
Igor
спине, казалось
was
бы,
one
такая
of the
вот общая
co-authors
проблема, она
of
касается, ну,
our
80%
presentation.
космонавтов. Если их прицельно спрашивать, то, в общем-то, это проблема
But
на сегодняшний день.
we
И не очень
talked
понятно,
about the problems
за счет
that
чего
we still have.
возникают эти боли. И вот благодаря тому,
And we
что у
talked
нас в
about
институте
the problems of back
проводятся
pains
эксперименты сейчас
that
с
the
сухой
astronauts
иммерсией,
and cosmonauts
которые ловят
experience.
на спиндик,
Almost
у меня
80% complain
большие
about it.
надежды на
And
то,
right now
что
we
мы,
have
во-первых, у
immersion
себя как-то
experiments
сможем
planned to study this phenomenon.
опубликовать, во-первых, те
And I'm
интересные
hoping
данные,
that we'll be
которых
able
было
to publish the
заявлено,
result
и
of
попытаться
these
ответить на
experiments.
вопрос, все же, что же такое гипотрофия,
And I'm
атрофия, так сказать,
hoping
и
we'll be
прочие
able to
мышцы.
try and address
И
the issue of
откуда берутся, так сказать,
hypertrophy
дальнейшие
and atrophy
изменения, которые
muscle
выводят на
tissues.
системный уровень, потому что надо когда-то
And where do the
попытаться
changes
осмыслить то,
come
что уже
from that
наработано
eventually
с
become
американской стороны,
systematic?
с российской, с европейцами, с
And
японской.
what happens with the countermeasures that were developed on the Russian side, US side,
медицинских операций.
and so
Но, к
forth.
сожалению, научных вот таких вот обсуждений серьезных
So we do a lot of
ну,
work in this
не
area,
получается
but
пока.
we're
И
not
я
holding a
очень
lot
надеюсь
of
на то, что вот эти симпозиумы,
medical
они как
scientific
раз послужат
discussions
тому,
on the
над
subject.
чем мы бьемся.
So I'm
Между
hoping
прочим,
that
Юрий
this type of
Борисович,
meetings and
он
symposia will allow us to address
главной медицинской
all
комиссии,
those
так
issues
как
and
Валерий
questions that are
Васильевич
so important
Богомолов
for
является
us.
заместителем председателя главной медицинской комиссии, и иногда у нас
And
возникают
I
такие
know
вопросы, которые ни хирурги, ни
that there are
терапевты,
some
ни
issues that
другие
we'll work
специалисты
with
не могут решить.
that cannot
Часть
be
космонавтов
resolved by
уходит просто из
surgeons
отряда
or
из-за того, что у них вот опять же возникают
therapy specialists,
боли
and there are a
в спине,
lot
боли в
of
позвоночнике, так сказать, и
astronauts and cosmonauts who leave the
найти
Corps
какой-то
because they don't know how to
субстрат для
deal
того, чтобы
with the
доказать,
pain
так
that they're
это или не так.
experiencing,
И
back
попробуй не
pain.
поверить космонавту, что у него действительно боли достаточно серьезные.
What we have
так
to
сказать.
do is
Поэтому вот,
address this issue,
эти фундаментальные
understand
вопросы,
why this pain
мне бы
occurs.
хотелось
Right now, there is
чтобы
no
мы вместе
understandable
смогли
reason for that, but we can't say that we don't
частично
believe to the crew members that complain about it. So there are issues that we need to address, and we'll do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Graham?
Thanks, Bill. I want to point out one very visible example of Russian-US collaboration, and that was a few years ago now, but I think it's still very important, and that was the first submission of a scientific paper from space. And this paper was actually published in the Journal of Trauma. It was entitled Ocular Examination for Trauma Clinical Ultrasound Aboard the International Space Station. And the first author was Dr. Leroy Chow, and the second author was Salazan Sharapov, and there were other authors on the paper as well, and there's a very famous and well-used image of Leroy actually performing an ultrasound examination on Salazan. So I think that's a really, really nice visual, as well as a really nice tangible outcome of US-Russian collaboration and a great scientific result. The other quick points I wanted to make, Bill, just to pick up on something Jeff Sutton said. So there is some discussion going on about potentially having a Russian subject, in this case it would be potentially Mikhail Konyenko, participate with the cognition suite. That's still in the works, but it'll be exciting if we're able to actually pull that off. And then lastly, on the omics side, I do agree that there is a real opportunity here potentially to increase our N if we were able to add Russian subjects as well as US astronauts. We would have more subjects, not just on the ISS, but potentially on the ground as well for ground control. So I think that's really a topic that's worthy of much more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Koichi?
When I when I flew with Dr. Mike Barrett 5 years ago, we were really busy. We had only 3 crew members on board. Gennady Padalko was our commander, and Mike and me. And so 5 years later, now I just came back from the space station. I think our pace of work is really nice compared to 5 years ago, and I think we're streamlining the operational efficiency more and more as we gain more experience. So crew time on board, I think, is not a huge constraint as a lot of people think that might be. And I think we are gaining more efficiency on operation by having more flexibility in the execution of the experiment and maintenance tasks, and also having more autonomy when it's meaningful or necessary. And these will lead to the more efficient operation. So I think in order to have more utilization time, especially in the human research program, is the coordination in the bilateral, multilateral level for the informed consent briefing process, data sharing framework, and also pre-flight and also the post-flight, the data collection coordination. Those are the toughest part of that. And I think by having this kind of communication in this kind of forum and officially in the management level, that will lead us to a more cooperative effort, especially in the human research program.
Thank you. Paul?
Yes. If I have to point out positive examples of international cooperation, I usually just point out at the station itself. I mean, after all, there is a US lab, a European lab, Japanese lab, and it's, people don't understand. They think, I mean, the general public think you are a European astronaut and you're going to work on the European module and that's it. And when I tell them, that's not, I mean, it could be that you're sitting in the Columbus module working on a US piece of hardware under control of Tsukuba, which makes it very complicated when you have to call the right people, and always they tell you, oh, stand by, and they pass you to another thing. So I think that's a very good international cooperation, just already sitting there. I know my colleagues here, most of you are PIs and work on life science part, so I'm not going to talk about this one. I would put up a couple of examples of what I think they are very good international cooperation that somehow have nothing to do with I mean, they are kind of skewed in a certain way. And for example, I'm looking at AMS. So that the station is, because it's just there, and CERN, and it's a big thing. I mean, AMS, it's a big project. It's a big international project. It costs a lot of money. A lot of things is sitting there and is producing data. That's a pretty good successful international cooperation with other international agencies. I would mention, for example, Vessel ID, another technological experiment, just sitting there collecting data from ships. Transponder data from ships that are sent to ground. I was looking, and I saw that lately it's collecting something like 400,000 data per day from 22,000 ships, and then shipping them to ground and mapping all of this. So this can tell us a lot of things. And the last one that I would mention is actually a weird one, at least for us. It's ARIS. So the ham radio people, which kind of work on the fringes there somehow, but it's amazing how this is a really international cooperation, and they actually, if I would like to mention which one is the most successful outreach and educational program on station today, I would probably point at ARIS, and it works, and it's done mostly on volunteer basis, and they have a structure, international structure. It doesn't seem, at least from the user point of view, that there are national conflicts or anything like this. They're very active. Lately, they brought up the ham TV, so the capability of sending down video images from the station, which is pretty challenging. If we would do it I know that ESA wanted to put a long time ago a video terminal up there, and the cost was like $35 million. And this guy put up this thing with nothing essentially. So we should probably look at all of these things and see how they work and learn a little bit of things.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, those are very good.
International Space Station is operated by truly multilateral approach. This is very important, and then which makes one nation access to the other countries. That is very important, especially for Japan, actually. And then this gives the two good positive the benefits. The one is for the science community. Because it is a multilateral operations, I think we can do the data sharing, hardware sharing, and also the good for the crew because we can reduce the time of crew operation and then reduce the duplication and try to minimize time for crew to do it. And also through the international AO, announcement of opportunity of the research, right now, we have some people are missing from this meeting because there's a meeting of the life science, International Space Life Science Working Group is being held at where's the Belgian country? Brussels. So through that international AO, now we have a good exchange amongst the researchers, which promotes the science. And then talking about the one country access to the other countries, for example, during the shuttle time, for example, Japanese PI is only be able to use for Japanese crew. So if we collect the 10 subjects, took 10 years or something like that, even more than 10 years. But now we can access to the multilateral countries so that the N number 10 or 20 subjects, it's easier to achieve. And then that is the first one, that the beneficial for the science community, including the crew operation. And the second one is because ISS is a multilateral approach, I think cultural exchange is promoted because many people, not only crew, but also engineers or managers, many people visited many countries, and also we have almost every day we have a teleconference. So I think we have a sleep deprivation because of the teleconference, but through that exchange, the cultural, the opinion exchange of that kind, we also exchange the culture. And one example is the beginning of the International Space Station in Clear Lake area, sushi, Japanese popular food, was not popular at all. But thanks to the American people who visited to Japan, ate a very tasty sushi, actually advertise how tasty it is. Now, sushi becomes very popular in the United States. So that is one example, thanks to the International Space Station. So I think ISS, again, the truly international the approach, so which promotes science and also the cultural exchange.
Brilliant.
All right. Thank you very much. That's intriguing. So we have Tang and sushi now that are spin-offs from space. Huh? So I heard lots of good things here, which is really encouraging to me. And I think we all need to step back and periodically reflect on some of these things. And I think Paulo captured some of the big picture things. The fact that the station is even up there operating every day, and also it was brought up all the activities that occur on the ground to coordinate this really multilateral facility every day is truly an international cooperation activity. I think there's also areas that we can improve on, and we've talked about some of those, the data sharing things. I think doing more international AOs or announcements of opportunity is really positive. So we start out with the idea that the data is not owned by one person. The data really is internationally important to everyone. And I think that's a thing that I think we clearly recognize in the management level, is that we want this data to be available. Station is a finite resource with a finite amount of data that can be captured, and how can we maximize that? So I think we can try to knock down some of those barriers. Some of them we don't see, some of them we're aware of. And we'll try to keep working through those and try to get the protocols better and more synchronized. I think the thing that's interesting is new projects are coming online, like in the behavioral area. It appears that in that area, again, because it kind of emerged with the new software, that allowed a lot of cooperation to begin with. Whereas if that would have been established before, then it would have been more difficult to maybe get that cooperation. The challenge now will be to take that software that was run in Mars 520 and make sure that same kind of activity occurs on station, and you get access to the entire crew on board space station. And we'll work to do that and work with you to get those things done. So there are lots of good things going on. I think the other example that Paulo mentioned is also very interesting, the ham radio. That's fairly informal and fairly volunteer, but it probably reaches more students throughout the world than any activity we have. I know you do ham radio conferences with kids all over the world, and that's fairly informally coordinated. So sometimes when you tell me you need to bring things up to management and get approval and do all those things, that maybe brings a layer of overhead that's not necessarily
But it's
helpful.
interesting because it doesn't cost too much. There is hardware. All the astronaut and cosmonaut participate to it. You can be called and go to the US or the Russian segment to do it. I mean, it's really, truly a no border thing that happens on station.
Yeah. So we need to look at that and look at how that works, right? Then not make too many people aware of it, because somebody will try to control it.
Exactly.
But if we just let them know that it's out there, look at the good pieces of how it works, and then figure out a way that we can implement that in other areas. Valery?
Я бы хотел сказать, что
I would like to say the
в плане
following.
кооперации
In terms of
очень
cooperation,
важно такие
it is very
симпозиумы,
important
которые
to
организовываются
hold
господином Эбби,
summits
господином Альфредом.
like the ones that are organized by Dr. Ebby and Dr. Alford, because this provides us with a forum
свои, так сказать, позиции.
for
И это тоже
comparing
элемент
our approaches,
кооперации.
which is another element of cooperation. Because if you're just staying within your agency,
порой не совсем хорошо понимаем общие
sometimes
тенденции у наших
lose sight
коллег.
of other
И вот
trends are the
такие
developments
симпозиумы,
that are
они,
taking
мне
place
кажется,
within the agencies of our
его
colleagues.
формат дает возможность
And I think
совершенно
summits
искренне
like this one
выразить
allow
свои
us
точки
to
зрения,
speak
сверить
openly and honestly
свои
and to
представления
compare
с
our
представлениями
viewpoints
коллег,
with the
поэтому я
viewpoints of
считаю,
our
мы
international
должны
colleagues.
благодарить за
And therefore, I would
организацию
like to
именно
thank
таких
our hosts again for
конференций,
organizing
симпозиумов, которые
this
не
conference,
носят
this
формального
summit,
характера конференции, где
that are
презентации, где
informal in nature. You don't have to have
значит, работа. Вот такая
presentations,
свободная
official
дискуссия, она очень
reports.
полезна
So
именно
this
для
open,
кооперации и
honest,
для
sincere discussion is very important
Спасибо.
for strengthening our cooperation. Thank you.
Yeah, those are excellent remarks. And I will tell you, I've been to many of these conferences, and what's intriguing to me to see is how this conference itself has even changed over time, right? When I first came to this conference, it was seen, I would say, as an international conference, and by international conference, there were participants from various countries or groups presenting, and they kind of, we presented not as a team, but as almost as individual countries and individual presenters. What I'm starting to see this year is I'm starting to feel that this is not individuals actually presenting, it's actually now a community. We've actually created an international community of the Russians, the Europeans, the Japanese, and the Americans all together as one group. So it's almost as we've formed our own culture, right, as was described earlier, right, that now there's a way we can communicate informally and have discussions, and that's really come about from time. And what we need to do is continue this activity where, we're bringing the Indians in this year, we'll bring the Chinese in next year, if we can get some earlier visa stuff taken care of, and then we'll bring them into this community. So I think this partnership we built with the space station can be that nucleus of how we can work together seamlessly, and then that can expand out, and then we can move the research field out. So what's really intriguing to me is I see this as really a life science community coming together really as a total group and not individual pieces, as Valerie described. And that's been a huge change over the conferences I've attended here. So let me open it up to any questions in the audience, and then if there's none, I have some. If you want to say something, Dave.
Yeah, I just wanted to add an issue that it went by very fast, but this cooperation that we're engaged in and should be engaged in internationally, there are these boundary points around the rules in different countries regarding confidentiality of data and how data gets shared. They're not insurmountable. We have to have discussions between parties on how to do it. It is critical that the scientists, we all know this, that our job is not to decide who flies in spaceflight. Our job is to understand what spaceflight does to humans. Somebody else is concerned with who flies. We have to protect the identity, that is, keep it anonymous, of the data. And we cannot, the astronauts can reveal who they are and they were in a study, but we cannot do that. At least on this side of the pond, in the United States, we are not allowed to divulge that ever. Even if one of them said, just ask Dr. Dinges, I was in his study, I wouldn't answer that. And I think we have to respect that so that the astronauts and cosmonauts are comfortable giving the data, and their organizations, however they select, do whatever they do, and then the data becomes public domain and shared out, but maintains and protects the identity of the astronauts who provided it. So I think we can never forget that, because it will compromise the entire system. If there's a single leak or a misstep in this area, it can cause a serious problem.
Okay, thank you. Any other panel members have anything they want to make or making other statements before? Yeah.
I'd like to just do a quick follow on that. Aside from astronauts sharing their data, one of the big issues I found as HRP lead is investigators sharing their data.
Yeah.
And we have a time-limited resource in ISS. We lose it in hopefully 2024, maybe even later. But that's not much time when investigations typically take 1 to 3 years to come to publication. And even as a research manager, it was sometimes difficult to get the consolidated results of research, which our agency or other partners paid for. We need to be much more agile in getting that data together and sharing it so that not just the US side or the Russian side, but all partners can use it to inform their next step research. That's the most efficient way to use station. There is no other forum that works like that. The closest is the World Health Organization, which feels compelled to share epidemiologic data of outbreaks in one country to another, so there's some urgency. But there's no place where the driver is really academic need to share information in a timely fashion because of a time-critical resource. So we have to build that. We have to build it quickly, and I hope that that would be a model that will carry over to exploration as well. So there's a little sense of urgency there, which we could probably use managerial help with.
We're good at creating urgency. Not necessarily results, but urgency we're good at. Go ahead.
Our moderator challenged the panel at the beginning
Sure.
to address not only what's worked well, but what enabled that collaboration. I would really like to hear from many of you how those of us in the science community, I'm here as an investigator, can help move this forward. In other words, many of us have international colleagues. Should we be more proactive in reaching out to them and say, well, let's work together on this project and see how well we can make it work? But we are also hearing that the managers play an important role, right? And so we've heard about some obstacles perhaps posed by management or bureaucratic rules or that pose obstacles. What can those of us in the science world to help move this forward?
So I look to the panel to help me answer this. Since I asked you at the beginning and you skirted the question.
As an investigator, there's no entitlement. You can't go into a collaboration with an entitlement. that you're going to get something and they owe it to you. You have to be willing to work for this. You have to understand who you're collaborating with, what rules they're operating by, and we've done this repeatedly. And you have to take the time and effort to understand their engineered systems, how they get data, what they want out of it, what they want from you. You have to reach these agreements and really maintain personal relationships. Most of the time it comes down to the one-on-one. Igor Savilev has had a massive impact on our ability to work with IBMP. Which was the plan, I guess, all along, but it worked. A lot of academics have an entitlement because they're used to doing something in their lab to get the money, they call the shots. That's not the way it works here. You work with the system, and you don't get everything you want, but you're clever, you have charm and guile, and you find ways to do it. And you share the fruit of the victory when it's a win-win, and you take responsibility for when you screw up. And it's pretty simple, but that's the way it works.
Okay, any others? Yep.
Yeah, just to follow on with David and Sue's question, there certainly the individual relationships are extremely important. There are other things too. Chuck, you mentioned the working group that's currently taking place in Brussels. There's a joint working group that just took place in April that's bilateral between U.S. and Russia, and this is a forum where there's a structure and protocols that come out that outline areas of not only potential collaboration but real collaboration that is currently taking place. I think there's some other things too. Within the U.S., of course, NASA awards grants as well as contracts, but it also awards cooperative agreements. And in the title of cooperative agreement it is a partnership. There is cooperation that takes place. So whereas a grant one receives funds and then goes ahead and basically as an investigator you can collaborate with whoever you like, more or less within the rules. A contract, really is a service that gets performed, but a cooperative agreement, and not everybody in the government necessarily agrees with having cooperative agreements, but you've been involved with NSBRI, as has David and a number of folks here. It's an extremely valuable partnership that NASA has. It enables an entity to sometimes do things that the government in the U.S. can't do on the international front, and certainly Mars 520 was an example, but it does many things sometimes that are unexpected, and I don't know how it works in other countries, but I'm absolutely convinced that because of the government's investment in the cooperative agreement, we were able to attract really outstanding community of scientists that really engage and work together, and also it enabled the Institute to attract really important people like Graham Scott to help the Institute move forward into new areas. And it puts pressure on some of the universities. In the case of the specific cooperative agreement with NSBRI, put pressure on Baylor College of Medicine to establish an academic unit, really the first of its kind, where we have medical students that graduate with their MD having taken a space medicine track, and that you have faculty who are actually the program managers are also professors. And so this academic environment is a natural one for international collaboration, because so much of the universities are filled with international students and very productive international collaborations that take place particularly at the postdoc level and so forth. So I'm putting a pitch in here for the mechanism of cooperative agreements are very powerful, and they allow an individual investigator to hook up to an entity that's not only larger themselves, but sometimes larger than their own institution, and really can work at a national level. It's a very effective means for engaging with other internationals. Thank you.
That's excellent. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Я бы хотел...
Along the same line,
Larry first, and then.
Oh, okay, go.
Okay, good. No, you can stay.
Я бы хотел добавить, что
I would like to add
вот мысль Инессы
that
Венедиктовны Козловской в отношении позиции
Inessa's idea on the management position
потому что
is quite important
от
because
научного сообщества прежде всего
science community
популяризации и
has to
демонстрации успехов и
make it
задач.
popular and make it known what the success and what the tasks are. And quite often the managers are not aiming in the same direction because the goals may be different. This is one thing. To make it popular, you can when people want to know what is going to happen. When people don't want to know what was going to happen, and that includes the management, that becomes difficult. In this respect, international cooperation can help. It can help by having more joint publications, generate more joint positions on development of space medicine. And another difficulty is political and economic interests of the management do not always fall in line with the scientific goals and objectives, and the politics often prevails. That is why the only way that we can choose here, I think, to publish jointly, to make it popular, to make sure that people know what we are doing. Education, to educate the management is the task. Thank you very much, Valery Vasilyevich, for everything and for this comment especially, because it is quite important, and you have clarified what I was saying, probably maybe too emotionally, but you put some logic behind it, and I want to stress something else. I'm listening to everybody and I'm analyzing what do we have on our Russian side from ISS. I understand that one of the channels that helps the international cooperation is also the bilateral groups, activities of bilateral groups. Maybe this is not the right ratio, but if you compare bilateral achievements, this is quite a lot compared to something that has been being formally and on a greater scale formalized. The same with ESA, Japan, and Canada. Maybe we are not as active in bilateral cooperation with Canada, but on each with each country where we have some bilateral cooperation, we are talking about cooperation on bilateral level also. It happens so. I don't want to offend anybody, but the lower we are in our bilateral cooperation, the easier it is. But when we climb higher and when we meet more and more requirements and limitations that have been established not by what we want to do, but because we have different cultures, because we have different politics, because we have different goals maybe sometimes, and the financial aspect also comes to play. I understand confidentiality requirements are also important. Dr. Zingers mentioned that we have a lot of hurdles. And as a result, we have a really heavy system that is difficult to climb through. It seems like you have already gotten through most of it, but then you find another obstacle. And then it turns out that bilateral cooperation is easier and actually more goal-oriented, and we have better results. However, we are still at the level now, level of mutual trust and ability of working together, that we are still achieving what we want to achieve, and we are able to overcome the heaviness of the structure that is imposed on us. I think we can still achieve a lot by trying to maybe ease some of the obstacles that are imposed on us. Thank you.
Just briefly, for the promotion of science use and science collaboration that you pointed out, one thing is missing from the ISS multilateral operation, which is the ISS IWG, Investigators Working Group. Like, for example, the Bonnie or Bonnie Dunbar, whoever flew on the Space Lab mission, during the Space Lab mission time back in 1980s, every time when we finished the space laboratories operation, we had the specific investigators working group to talk about the 3 months or 6 months or 1 year reports, which we have learned from the mission. Because ISS is an increment, so there is, it's very difficult to find maybe the good timing. But maybe my suggestion is the biggest the meeting related to this is the NASA Human Research HRP, Human Research Program. What is the workshop? Yeah, workshop usually held at the February. So if you can designate that big meeting as a multilateral international collaboration working using that opportunity, then you can invite many international people, whoever who want to just express what they have learned from that increment, or maybe in the middle of the 5 subjects going toward the 10 subjects or something like that. But then we can exchange the idea, so that I think we can work together with the different PIs making the different proposal. So my suggestion is the ISS, Investigators Working Group, which never happened so far.
Okay, that's a good idea. We'll think about how we do that. We do like a U.S. kind of investigators working group. There will be one in Chicago here in a couple of weeks where we talk about, at least on the U.S. side, major things that have occurred on the ISS, on the U.S. ISS side, but this investigators working group idea multilaterally might be very, very important. So we'll take an action to try to figure out how to do that, but that's good. Okay, yeah, one more question out here in the audience.
So this follows on David and Anessa's remarks, and with the twin study, as we are getting into the genomics area for the first time, a lot of that experimental data is inherently identifiable. And so within the US, we are wrestling with how to deal with that, how to share data amongst our investigator team, and how to share it with the broader scientific community, and what are the right protections, et cetera. And that's just the US side, and it's a challenging problem. Internationally, there are different laws, there are different practices, and the like, and so that'll be even a greater challenge as we try to do these studies in future. But I just wonder, given the recent past with ISS and with Mars 500, for example, are there good examples of where data sharing across the different laws and policies of the countries was worked out well? Or alternatively, were there cases where the differences really created an obstacle that has yet to be overcome in terms of sharing data amongst the investigator community and publishing the results?
Well, I don't know the answer to your question about the internationals. I believe American law allows that an individual can release their data publicly and can say, I want my data to be given away. Now, it's not a trivial thing, and it has to be done in an appropriate ethical examination and legal way. But that's really the only course right now when the N is 1, or even 2, when it's ridiculously low to the point where you could identify who that is. That poses a real challenge to us, and maybe what we have to do is be creative, talk with what we call our institutional review boards about adding other data to the data mix, and have, this is going to sound kind of strange, but allowing the data to be anonymized inside a larger data set, but some way to segregate out, once it's codified, some way to segregate out who the individuals were, the particular interest. But this is, again, something that needs discussion. We need to know how other countries would handle it. But frankly, the best deal is don't get N's of 1 and 2. Start with that as pilot data, but get N's that are larger. And I think that's the goal, Graham, right? We're looking for signal here. And then from then you'd go on to do science at a more intense level with larger sample sizes. But I just want to mention the longer duration space flights give us an opportunity to something that proved to be incredibly fruitful in Mars 520. The more time you have, the more you can build cumulative functions of what's happening to individuals, and you can look at dynamic changes.
This is very important.
And dynamic modeling of data using mathematical models, which I wish the international community would start doing. We use this in the sleep circadian area. Beth Claremon's in the room. She's a master in this, but there are others where we plug every data, all the data we generate in long-term studies in the lab, we pump back into these models, and the models keep trying to make a prediction for what the next experiment will show and then get applied to the real world. I'd like to see us have an all-out effort to maximize our data through modeling of what limited data we have, what is predicted over time. Then as the missions get longer and we get samples populated in a Bayesian way back to correct the model, we need a community of modelers. We need some good mathematicians, people who know math, and the Russians have a long history in good mathematics, but we need people who know differential equations, people who understand the modeling variables that go into it. This is an achievable area, and a few of us in the room know how this has been achieved in the sleep and circadian dynamic area. But I'd like to see more of that to leverage our data and get away from relying on individuals in the data and model out what the system's doing as you go through spaceflight.
Okay.
Что касается эксперимента
As to Mars 500 experiment, we are going to have analog session that's on the agenda, and I think we will probably touch upon that as well. But just a few words. There was an international conference held on Mars 500, and of course there was a data share with confidentiality limitations that we had. But I think Professor Gushin is going to talk about it more when we're going to have an analog session.
Okay. All right, let's go maybe one more question here in the audience.
Yes, sorry, a lot of the conversation has focused on how you formalize a collaboration internationally and whether you bring in management or whether you do it on the fly up on the station. There's another approach which I think is being adopted at Johnson Space Center through Jeff Davis's organization, which is called the NASA Human Health Performance Center. And it's a virtual collaboration site. And one of the greatest aspects of that is the focus on making a broader audience aware of what the problems are that need solved so that you can get a bigger engagement from people who perhaps were not involved in space before or space life sciences before. And I think that's a really important aspect, going back to the ham radio. It brings in people who are looking at things, that making connections that we don't make because we're so involved in the business, if you like. And I think that's another aspect. And if you haven't seen the NHHPC, it's well worth looking at. There's an international group of people in there from academic institutions, companies, government agencies, and I think it's. I think that's a really good approach, and it's a way of bringing the kinds of things we're doing really home to the people that it's important to, the people who are paying the taxes in our different countries for this research. And I just wanted to make that comment. I don't know if there's any comment from the panel about that. Thank you.
Okay. Any response to that or any kind of closing comments from any of the panel members? And then I'll wrap up with a little bit of summary, if that's okay. Any comments from anyone? Any final thoughts? Anything you learned that you're going to take action on? So then next year it will be completed, and Charlie won't stand up in the back of the room and ask us why we're not doing collaboration, and I'll cower in my chair. So. Anything else? All right. Again, I would say kind of my takeaway is, first of all, we need to really step back and look at all the positive things that we've been doing and have accomplished over the years with ISS. So I think that's the first thing. You know, we always kind of focus on the negative side and where areas where we can improve on, and that's important in the spirit of constant learning and improvement. But I think it's also good to celebrate some of the things that have worked well. Anessa's having trouble with this concept, but it's okay. So, but I think again we ought to go look at that. The other thing that I kind of picked up out of all this discussion is, I think we need to, along those same lines, we need to have some kind of investigators working group at the multilateral level. And I don't know exactly how we'll do that, but we'll get together and we'll talk about setting up some kind of forum to do it. Again, we've got to be careful we don't get so bureaucratic that we have formal paper submits and then there's some peer review process, and then that will defeat the purpose of what we're trying to do. So we need to figure out a way that we make it a quality recognized gathering of folks that share data, but it's not so onerous to present all the information that it takes forever to get there. Because that's the one thing I heard the advantage effectively of this meeting here. So we'll take a chance at doing that. One thing, when I was in Russia last week, I talked to IBMP a little bit, and we do the joint working group between NASA and IBMP and Russia each year. And then they come up with great ideas to go work on, and then out of that meeting, then they go try to take them to management, and management says, that's not such a good idea, don't go do that. So one thing I talked about was maybe I would actually bring management in, bring the appropriate folks at Roscosmos and the appropriate folks at NASA right after the joint working group, and then they would hear the results of the joint working group, and management would take an action to try to enable some of the actions that the joint working group came up with. So the idea is to short circuit the time delay and actually force management to be involved much more at the joint working group level to make that more effective. So Igor and I talked about that a little bit in Moscow last week, and I'll try to figure out a way to actually implement that. And I will tell you, we have some agreements already in place. Mike Suffredini and Alexei Krasnov have signed a protocol to effectively take advantage of using more Russian crew member time on orbit and making them available to the investigator community. What's happened with that, though, is it turns out now we get then hung up in the bigger political problem, in the fact that if there's an investigation on the U.S. side that was not approved through the Russian academies, and it's not an approved research activity, then it becomes problematic to have a Russian cosmonaut contribute to that activity when it didn't go through the Russian Academy process of approval. So we're trying, and I'm sure it's probably the same way on the U.S. side if you looked at it the other way. If we wanted to contribute astronaut time to go do an investigation, the community would say, wait a minute, we competed for this activity through this. Now you're short-circuiting that by working with the Russians on the other side, and you bypass the entire competition and selection process, which is not good. So I yet don't know how to do that, because we had this huge list between Mike and Alexei of items we wanted to go do, and one experiments where we wanted to share, and we wanted to do data back and forth, and then we ran right into the academies. So I went and talked to the academies also when I was in Moscow a little bit, and I talked to them, could they give us some relaxation? They didn't say yes, they didn't say no. I'll take that as we're going to try to figure out a way to make that happen. So we need to look at a way where competition doesn't become a prohibitor to us getting the cooperation we're trying to do. We need to keep competition in a way, and that's right, to compete for grants and research activities, et cetera. But we also, that's important, but it's also, we need to make sure that that doesn't drive us to where we can't get the cooperation done, because we only have a finite amount of time. We have a unique resource here. maybe that circumvents a little bit some of those restrictions are there. But I need you to think about this as a community. So again, throughout this session, I learned a lot. Again, things to think about, some actions. We'll have some discussion groups later today that I'll chair on cooperation, a little broader thing where we'll actually put together a paper to try to present tomorrow morning. So again, think about this stuff and again, celebrate what's occurring with Space Station. You know, I often think about if there was no space station, where would we really be, right? I mean, it is really the basis for what we're doing in international cooperation. We need to use this station to really expand and get better in the future. So again, thank you for your time, and hopefully you found this session interesting.